Hello students, welcome to your new channel Physiology Redefined. This channel is introduced for the medical students and the students of the allied health science to build the concept on physiology in a simplistic and very interesting way, so that on the basis of that concept you can proceed for your further learning on the physiology. I hope this channel will help you a lot, and I also believe if you feel good elements in this channel, you will subscribe this channel, you will share this channel, and also you will press the like button, like icon of this channel, of this program. So today I will discuss the topics, that is homeostasis. So topics is what? Homeostasis. So in this video, I will try to give you a concept regarding what is homeostasis, what are the different types of the homeostasis, and how the different homeostatic mechanisms control the body systems, control or maintain the constant internal environment, that is the extracellular fluid. You all know that for the normal functioning of the body requires the nutrients, body requires different type of gases, body requires different type of elements, and these elements, these nutrients, they used to take from the internal environment, that is the extracellular fluid, and these parameters comes to the internal environment from different atmosphere, from the atmosphere, or that is known as the external environment. So today we will discuss, I will try to give you the basic concepts regarding the homeostasis as I told earlier. So please watch this video till the end, and if you like the video, if you like this class, please press the like icon, share it to your friends, and don't forget to subscribe it. So let us start today's class, that is homeostasis. Now before going to the topics, I want to cite an example to you. Suppose in a road accident, two persons are badly injured. They bled profusely, but luckily they are quickly brought to the hospital. Doctors are quick enough to attend both of them. While attending the first patient, doctor found no change of the blood pressure, or almost normal blood pressure, nothing serious to the patient. So he gave some first aid treatment and released the patient. On the other hand, while releasing the second patient, he found that blood pressure is severely low, very low blood pressure. So immediately he was admitted for that medical intervention or for the treatment. So now here question comes, why this happens? In one person there is no need of medical intervention, no need of treatment. In other persons there is a need of the treatment or the medical intervention. Whereas both of them injured in a same accident, and both of them got injured with the profound blood loss. So now we will discuss one by one what happened to the first person and what happened to the second person. So let us, for the first person now, first. So for the first person, what's happened? For the first person, what's happened? As I told, there is a injury, and injury means there is a blood loss. There is a blood loss. So if the blood is lost from the body, you know that obviously the blood volume will be decreased to that person. So we can say there is a fall of the blood volume or decrease of the blood volume. Now you know that if the blood volume is low, and as the blood is supplied to the body, to the entire body, by the pumping action of the heart, so there is a need of the blood of the body to first go to the heart. That means the amount of the blood that is reached to the heart, which is known as venous return, that will also be decreased. That means the low amount of the blood will be reached to the heart. That is known as the decrease. So we can say there is a decrease venous return or decrease the return of blood to the heart, that is known as the venous return. Now if the venous return is less, as the venous return is low, that amount of the blood, whatever amount of the blood ejected out of the heart or pumped out of the heart, obviously that will be low. As less amount of blood comes to the heart, obviously less amount of the blood will be pumped out of the heart. That means that is known as the stroke volume. So we can say there is a decreased stroke volume. There is a decreased stroke volume or ejection of the blood to the body per ventricle, per beat. That is known as stroke volume, which will be again low. And stroke volume low means there is a ultimately fall of the cardiac output and finally the fall of the blood pressure. So the details of this thing, how this is happening, that will be discussed in another video. So here you just remember the fall of the stroke volume, that ultimately results the fall of the blood pressure. So because of the blood loss in each and every cases, initially there should be the fall of the blood pressure. There should be the fall of the blood pressure. But what the doctor found in the first patient, that is the normal blood pressure. That is the normal blood pressure. Doctor found the normal blood pressure to the first patients while attending him. That means somehow this fall of the blood pressure is counteracted, and thereby doctor found normal blood pressure. That means the fall of the blood pressure is counteracted to increase the blood pressure. So somehow the blood pressure is increased and thereby the blood pressure becomes normal. And so question comes here, how this blood pressure is increased in response to the fall of the blood pressure. So here we can say that there must be some controlling mechanisms in our body, There must be some controlling mechanisms in our body. There must be some controlling mechanisms in our body which actually brought this blood pressure back toward the normal by increasing it. And this controlling mechanism, that means counteract the change of the blood pressure, counteract the change parameters of the body, and thereby the normal blood pressure is maintained or normal internal environment is maintained. And this controlling mechanism is known as the homeostatic mechanism. So this is known as the homeostatic mechanism or homeostasis. So we can say that if any change of the parameter takes place due to any factor, any reason, body always tries to counteract it. And how they can counteract it? They used to counteract it by initiating some mechanism. And this mechanism is known as homeostatic mechanism or homeostasis. And purpose of this one is to maintain the normal functioning of the body. Normal functioning of the body has to be maintained, and this is maintained by the homeostatic mechanisms. So we can say that homeostasis is the mechanism, is the physiological mechanism by which the constancy of the internal environment is getting maintained. Why? To maintain the normal or the physiological functions and prevent the pathogenesis of different diseases. So we can say that homeostasis we can define homeostasis is the physiological mechanism. It is the physiological mechanism which maintains the constancy of the internal environment. That is extracellular fluid. Why? To maintain normal functioning of the body. Normal functioning of the body. So I repeat, homeostasis is the physiological mechanism which maintains the constancy of the internal environment. Which is the internal environment? That is the extracellular fluid, to maintain normal functioning of the body. And if this normal functioning of the body hampers, the disease starts. So entire physiology depends on this mechanism which is known as the homeostasis. Now question comes, how this homeostatic mechanism counteract the change to maintain the constant internal environment? And this is done by two mechanisms. So types of the mechanism, regarding the types of the mechanism, there are two types of the mechanism, two types of homeostatic mechanism by which the homeostasis is maintained, by which constancy of the internal environment is maintained. So first one is known as the negative feedback mechanism. Negative feedback mechanism. And second one is known as the positive feedback mechanism. Positive feedback mechanism. Mainly by these two mechanisms, the homeostasis, that is the constancy of the internal environment, is getting maintained by the body in response to any change of the internal parameters, to maintain the normal functioning of the body. So let us first discuss the negative details of the negative feedback mechanism. So again I will go back to the case of the first person who injured in that accident. So in the first person, as I told, there is a blood loss. There is a blood loss. And because of the blood loss, ultimately, that I discussed at the beginning, ultimately what happened? There is a fall of the blood pressure. There is a fall of the blood pressure. There is a fall of the blood pressure. Now, once the blood pressure falls, there is a change of the internal environment, and that change of the internal environment is corrected, is counteracted by the physiological mechanism. And what are those physiological mechanisms? There are different type of controlling mechanisms. One example I am giving here. So what is that example? So fall of the blood pressure, that means there is a two things happening simultaneously. One is the stimulation of chemoreceptors, present in the body. What is chemoreceptors? Again, this part I will discuss while discussing the cardiovascular system. So once the blood pressure falls, there is a fall of the partial pressure of the oxygen. There is an accumulation of the carbon dioxide in the body. So carbon dioxide pressure is raised, and as the carbon dioxide content of the body is raised, the hydrogen concentrations of the body is raised, or you can say pH of the body is decreased. So in response to this stimulus, that is fall of the oxygen pressure, rise of the carbon dioxide pressure, and rise of the hydrogen ion concentration. So in response to fall of the partial pressure of the oxygen, or in response to rise of the partial pressure of the carbon dioxide, or in response to rise of the hydrogen ion concentration in the blood, these receptors are stimulated. At the same time, there is a inhibition or inactivation of the baroreceptors. Inhibition of baroreceptors. So there are another category of the receptors present in the arterial wall of the arterial systems which are sensitive to pressure. So as the pressure is low now, they will be now inactivated. Again, the details of the baroreceptors I will discuss in some other videos under cardiovascular system. So inhibition of the baroreceptors in the one hand and stimulation of the chemoreceptors in the other hand. Now both of the parameters, that is stimulation of the chemoreceptors and inhibition of the baroreceptors, has got similar effect. What is that? That is the stimulation of sympathetic nervous system and inhibition of parasympathetic nervous system. Sympathetic nervous systems is stimulated and parasympathetic nervous systems is inhibited. Again, the details of this thing, how this happens, I will discuss while discussing under the cardiovascular regulatory mechanism. Now, this stimulation of the sympathetic nervous system and inhibition of the parasympathetic nervous system, these are responsible for the same action which is the rise of the heart rate and rise of the stroke volume, and this rise of the heart rate or the rise of the stroke volume ultimately results rise of the cardiac output, and this rise of the cardiac output is ultimately results the rise or increase the blood pressure. So here you see, what's happened. You see that in response to loss of the blood pressure changes, blood pressure decreased, and that initiates some controlling mechanisms, that initiates some mechanisms in the body which counteract that change of the blood pressure by increasing the blood pressure. So this is the homeostatic mechanism. Homeostasis is getting maintained, and in this homeostatic mechanism, how it is stimulated? This is stimulated by the fall of the blood pressure. So we can say this is the initiating stimulus. So this is the stimulus which starts the homeostatic mechanism, and final response is the rise of the blood pressure. So rise of the blood pressure is the final response. This is the final response. So here you see the initiating stimulus was the fall of the blood pressure, and final response is the rise of the blood pressure. Just opposite. And as the final response is opposite to that of the initiating stimulus. This mechanism is known as the negative feedback mechanism. So in this mechanism, in this homeostatic mechanism, what's happened? Final response becomes opposite to that of the initiating stimulus. So as it is opposite, negative, so this mechanism, this homeostatic mechanism is known as the negative feedback mechanism. So we can define, thereby we can define the negative feedback mechanism. So we can write that definition of the negative feedback mechanism. Definition of negative feedback mechanism. Negative feedback mechanism. So what is that? What is that? That is the homeostatic mechanism. The homeostatic mechanism. Homeostatic mechanism in which the final response, becomes opposite to initiating stimulus. Initiating stimulus. So this is about the negative feedback mechanism. That is it is the homeostatic mechanism, controlling mechanisms, in which the final response, net response, becomes opposite to the initiating stimulus. If the initiating stimulus is fall of the blood pressure, the final response will be rise of the blood pressure. If the initiating stimulus is fall of the blood volume, final response will be the rise of the blood volume. If the initiating stimulus is rise of the partial pressure of the carbon dioxide, final response is fall of the partial pressure of the carbon dioxide. If the initiating stimulus is fall of the sodium concentration in the body fluid, the final response will be the rise of the sodium concentration in the body fluid. So this is how the negative feedback mechanism helps to maintain the homeostasis, helps to make the internal environment at the constant level to maintain the normal functioning of the body. Now I will go to the second type of homeostatic mechanism that I already mentioned, that is known as the positive feedback mechanism. So now is about the positive feedback mechanism. So in that instant, I will go for the case of the second person, which I didn't discuss till yet. So in the second person, now I will consider the case of the second person who was admitted by the doctor. Why? Because his pressure was too low. So he also got injured. Because of the injury, there was the blood loss. And because of the blood loss, there was the fall of the blood pressure, like that of the first person. Now what's happened? But in this case, doctor noticed the blood pressure was too low. So doctor noticed the blood pressure was too low. BP was too low. That was found by the doctor, and that is why there is a requirement to get him admitted in the hospital. Now, how this happened? In response to fall of the blood pressure, in the second person, blood pressure gets further decreased. Now, how it happens? So, here we see now, we can think these things in other way. So, as the blood pressure is decreased, so we can say there is a decreased blood supply to the tissue, blood supply to the tissue, and to the tissue means we can say the blood supply to the cardiac muscle also. Cardiac muscle is also one type of tissue, so they will also suffer the lack of the blood, lack sufficient amount of the blood will not also go to the cardiac muscle. So we can say this is the fall of the blood supply to cardiac muscle, to cardiac muscle. And if the blood supply to the cardiac muscle is decreased, what's happened? There is a deficiency of the oxygen, deficiency of the different type of nutrients on which the pumping ability of the heart is dependent. So as the blood supply is low, so naturally what's happened? Low oxygen supply to the cardiac muscle, low nutrient supply to the cardiac muscle, and thereby what's happened? The working capacity of the heart muscle will be decreased, or we can say there is a decreased pumping action of the heart, decreased pumping action of the heart, pumping action of the heart, and this pumping action of the heart means there is a decrease, we can say there is a decreased stroke volume. And if the stroke volume is decreased, so obviously there is a fall of the cardiac output, and thereby there is a fall of the cardiac output. And as the cardiac output is decreased, what's happened? The blood pressure was further decreased. That was noticed, that was observed by the attending doctor. So because of this mechanism, what's happened? In response to fall of the blood pressure, which one is this is the initiating stimulus. Here, this is the initiating stimulus. Initiating stimulus. So this is the initiating stimulus which starts the homeostatic mechanism in the second person. So this is the initiating stimulus, that is the fall of the blood pressure. And this is the final response. This is the final response to the second person, final response. So here you see, initiating stimulus is the fall of the blood pressure, and the final response is also fall of the blood pressure. That means both are same, both are similar direction. So fall of the blood pressure here, final response also fall of the blood pressure, which are similar. So final response is similar to that of the initiating stimulus. It is not opposite. Here final response becomes similar to that of the initiating stimulus. So once the homeostatic mechanism in which final response becomes similar to that of the initiating stimulus, then that mechanism is known as the positive feedback mechanism. So that will be now known as positive feedback mechanism. So definition of the positive feedback mechanism we can write down now. So we can write down now the definition of positive feedback mechanism. definition of positive feedback mechanism. So in the similar way, what's happened? The homeostatic mechanism in which the final response becomes similar to the initiating stimulus. The homeostatic mechanism in which the final response becomes similar to the initiating stimulus is known as the positive feedback mechanism. That means if the blood pressure is decreased, by this mechanism blood pressure will be further decreased. If the blood pressure is increased, by this mechanism the blood pressure will be further increased. If the blood volume will be increased or decreased, blood volume will be decreased. By this mechanism, blood volume will be further decreased in the same direction. It will go on in the same direction. And this mechanism is known as the positive feedback mechanism. So here one question may come to your mind, that in this mechanism, as I told, if the blood pressure is decreased, blood pressure is not counteracted. Blood pressure is further decreased. The condition is getting deteriorated, not improved. So why it can be termed as homeostatic mechanism? It can be termed as positive feedback mechanism. That's okay. But why it can be included under the homeostatic mechanism? Because as per the definition is concerned, homeostasis is the maintenance of the constancy of the internal environment, which constant parameters are not getting maintained by the positive feedback mechanism. So this one I will discuss in my next video, the detail why this is happening, why it is included under the homeostatic mechanism. That I will discuss in the second mechanism, in my second video, in my next video. So if this is liked by you, please press the like button, share it to your friends and friend circle, and please don't forget to subscribe this channel. Okay, bye.